The number of divorces in Singapore has been hovering around 7,000 for a number of years now. But behind these numbers is another number that is often not mentioned or talked about and therefore forgotten. And that is the number of children sufferers of divorce. Each year, around 50% of divorces involve children under the age of 21. That translates into nearly 40,000 children over a 10-year period who have been affected by parental divorce. How does divorce impact children? I will be asking Elijah Sim, a senior therapist at the Counseling and Care Center. Trained as both a social worker and a counselor, Elijah spent the last 14 years as a full-time counselor as well as a trainer, with a focus on developing future generation of counselors to be both relational and compassionate in their practice. He especially finds great meaning and fulfillment journeying with couples and families through their challenges in life. Elijah is also married with 2 teenage children. Elijah, welcome.
Thank you, Person. Thanks for the kind introduction.
Well, that's what you told me to say.
Glad to be here anyway. Yes. Thanks, Person.
Okay, today I'm going to tap your brain on this subject of how divorce impacts children, as well as a new subject that I'm getting very familiar with, and that is parental alienation. So let's begin with divorce. Recently, MSF came out with the first of its kind study in Singapore on the long-term effects of parental divorce on children. Can you share, if you remember, what are some of the things they've found?
Sure. Yeah, Person, as you mentioned, I think there is this study by MSF in the recent year, I think the last 2 years or so. And the result has shown, and they call it, the divorce penalty of children who gone through, their parents going through divorce or already divorced. And some of the findings, I will just quote some of them, maybe not all, but some of them are, that divorce, children with divorce background compared to intact family were more likely, or rather less likely, to obtain a university degree, right? That's one. I thought that is significant to know. And I guess that is also tied in with the idea about their financial aspect in the future, right? The other aspect that kind of struck my attention too, and it's not surprising, and that these children are also less likely to get married as compared to children from intact family. And the next finding, which is also a cause of concern, is that these children were finding themselves more likely to undergo divorce when they subsequently get married as well. So these are the 3 findings that kind of strike a chord with me. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for sharing those. And I think there are others, and I think people can go and look up this article in the newspapers for the other aspects of impacts of divorce on children. In case you do not know, I'm also a child of divorce. My parents went through a divorce when I was 10, and so I can identify with some of the things that you just mentioned. For example, less likely to have a university degree. I don't have a university degree. No, I did. My marriage did not end in divorce, but it came very close to that, and so I'm very happy that it didn't happen. And what was not covered by the study are the emotional price children pay when their parents go through a divorce. Can you share with us, from your knowledge, what are some of these emotional price?
Sure. Thanks, Pastor, even for sharing your own background, right? So I at this point in time, I'm also speaking both from my professional capacity, having worked with families, worked with marriages, in thinking about the impact, the emotional price, as you mentioned, on children. But at the same time, like you, I'm also grew up in a single father kind of family. So I'm also speaking from that personal kind of experience I resonate with some of the finding, all right, but I personally resonate with some of the finding, but there are some things also that may not kind of show up in my own personal life. So they are great variety. So the finding should not point to a stereotypical way of looking at children from divorced background. But back to your question about the emotional, cause and impact on children. Yeah, generally, okay, if we think about that, there are three categories that we can think about. One is behaviorally, in terms of their behavioral impact. Second is in terms of their psychological and their emotional impact. That's the second bit. Third, in terms of their social relational aspect, that may show up in their relationship at home, and their relationship, for example, in their community, in school, right? Yeah. So let me talk about each of these briefly, all right? Because there's a great variety and great variation depending on the age of the children when their parents undergo divorce, whether they are, the preschooler, whether they are schooling children, whether they are teenager. But in a broad stroke, let me talk about it, a couple of things. All right. Let me begin with behavioral. The behavioral impact, all right, is something that is a little bit more obvious to the eyes, isn't it? All right. So sometimes, it may show up maybe in younger children, they get a little bit more clingy, a little bit more distressed, emotionally distressed. They may also show up, in nightmares, waking up, screaming, etc. kind of thing. Perhaps for older children, all right, sometimes behaviorally, it may also show up in their academic performance. Grades may slide and stuff like that. All right. Maybe they may also show up in some teenager in their rebellious kind of responses, getting a little more argumentative, or conversely, a little bit more withdrawn, right? They may, for some, find themselves not wanting to come home, spending more time outside of the family in that way. Because as a teenager, obviously you got peers, you want to spend time, but you can spend time with your friends because you're drawn to the friends, or sometimes you can spend time with your friend because you want to escape from something unpleasant at home, isn't it? So these are the behaviorally, some of the impact. All right. What I talk about behaviorally is already alluding to something about socially, because everything, all these three factors are interconnected. So socially, as I mentioned, some may be more withdrawn, okay, more withdrawn even from their social circles. As much as there are some may end up spending time, whether they're hanging out with friends, and that's where I think some of them may get into gangs, especially if they don't even have very good academic experience to begin with. These are the group of people may hang out with friends and get into bad company. On the contrary, there may be some who may be, quite good at academic, right? I'm talking about, so the goody two-shoe, appearing to be goody two-shoe, all right? But they may drown themselves in study. Possible reason, all right? Study become a distraction. All right. Secondly, study, all right, might possibly be their way of making peace at home, keeping peace at home, being a good child at home, to turn up good result in order to either please the parent, make things less tense, or for younger children, they may live with a myth that if I'm a better child, maybe my parents will fight less. Now, that's where that ties in with an emotional and psychological aspect. One of the things, especially for younger children who may not have the reasoning, everything is about themselves, including when my parents fight, I'm the one to blame. Now, imagine with me for the moment, And for those of us who are listening out there, whether you are just a person who is interested to know this subject, or you yourself going through that situation, pay attention to the child, right? About that weight, the emotional weight of that cell brain, that burden. Now, that is one great psychological cost. And along with it, the burden of wanting to just be doing well, behaving well, with the intent, all right, to make things better. Now, that's a psychological way. And I want to say this, behaviorally, it's easier to pick up a child who's rebellious, who speak up, who fight back, who explode. In fact, don't get me wrong, but hear the spirit of it. In fact, that may actually be a good thing. The child need to find a voice. But of course, they speak up, they fight back. The child is at least given a voice, right? But we need to pay attention to the voice and know what is hurting. But conversely, some children don't fight back. They quiet, they study, they behave, they do housework, they behave themselves. And then we think that they have no problem. And we think they're coping. And sometimes I work with parents, right? Parents are whether going through divorce or just marital conflicts, intense marital conflicts. And I say, how are your children? And sometimes they will say, oh, so and so, I think they are all right. They are still doing well. They can understand, that, and they keep to themselves. And it may not give problem for parents, but actually they may be suffering inside. Now,
yeah, I think parents like to use the word resilient for children, right?
Yes.
They say, oh, children are resilient, so no problem,
Yes. Yes.
Is that really true?
Yeah. Well, school is also talking about resilience. We all want to build emotional resilience, and that is, and there will be challenges in life. Don't talk about talking about divorce or parental conflict. I'll just talk about life. Having to deal with academic stresses, friendship issue. Demands from schoolwork, etc. And children need to learn emotional resilience. But my question is this. There are the normal stresses of life. For example, like every Singapore student will go through, the choice of CCA, balancing CCA, and this demand and that demand, all right? But a child's emotional resilience, whether they have the resources, the capacity, they have one to deal with the normal stresses of life, but then there are other things that are not, so to speak, the normal anticipated stresses of life. For example, the conflicts at home, violence at home, right? Or, for example, sometimes parents, have got conflicts, or their marriage is broken down. Maybe one spouse is feeling emotionally dry, unattended to. And one of the things that might be common, I don't have the stats for that, but one parent may actually go to the child and download, thinking that the child become either a pseudo counselor or a pseudo spouse. No, this is the additional stresses, not the usual normal stresses. And combine everything together, you have the normal stresses of life, you have all these additional stresses that is, so to speak, out of the norm. You don't have the model, so to speak. Oh, well, my friends all go through academic stress. I have some model, right? I have some example. But some of these other model, and sometimes, marital conflicts, family conflicts, and the belief, right? You don't wash the dirty linen in the public, and that may create a sense of shame, embarrassment, and it may impact children in a way, or teenagers in a way that I can't talk about it even, right? So they don't even have an example, the model to follow, and all these come together. Now, do I say, oh, they are resilient. They will find a way. Well, in some way it's true, but in some way we also know they will need help to build that emotional resilience. We don't just assume, right? They will need help. And the help, obviously, I think I need to first of all come from parents. I also fully recognize, parents when they are going through their own struggles, marital issue, conflicts, tension, etc., etc. Sometimes parents, to be honest, as parents, we sometimes also feel that we are breaking down and we don't have the emotional capacity or the resilience to attend to our children. Rightfully, parents should, but if they do not, then I think it beckons a question: who come alongside our children? What kind of support do we need as parents to build up our own emotional capacity to find healing on the one hand, and what kind of support do I bring alongside our children? Yeah. Okay. I hope I'm making sense, Watson.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
plenty of sense. So have you finished with the emotional price?
Oh yes, I alluded to a couple already, but I think it's worth mentioning, so that we can all be aware, people out there, to pay greater attention to the children, right? I'm speaking to not just home and family. I'm speaking to, if you are the educator, you are the school, or you're a counselor, or I'm speaking to maybe you're a friend, all right? You're just a friend, a peer. As you hear this, some of these further emotional cause, so that we can be more attentive. So other thing could be loneliness, a sense of loneliness. You may have friends, you laugh along, but you feel lonely, you feel isolated. And sometimes there's a lot of talk, right? The person you probably were aware, a lot of talk about mental health, children, youth, and mental health issue. Right? We hear a lot of example in the media recently: suicidal, depression, okay, even sometimes homicidal thoughts. Right. Wow, these are serious stuff. I think we need to hear their voice, their cry, their silent cry sometimes. Yeah, that is.
That's right. Silent cry is the word.
Yeah.